Welcome to Therapist Uncensored, a podcast where therapists freely speak their minds about real-life matters.
All right, welcome back. For those listeners following our adult attachment series, you're really going to love this episode. Well, actually, even for new listeners, this is a great one to get started on. In our show, we do a lot of discussion about building security within ourselves and in our relationships. And often we are talking about romantic relationships. And you know what? This applies in so many other ways. And there are many listeners out there that are not in romantic relationships, often by choice. So instead, today, we're going to focus on the single person not looking for a relationship. How does this work in all of what we're talking about work in real life and in all sorts of situations? And our guest today is Becky Mendeville. Becky cracks Sue up with her honest, to the point, and really touching interpretation of what she has gained from listening to our attachment series. So she's going to be approaching it from a complete non-therapist, single person perspective. And really, the conversation that Becky and Sue have is so enjoyable. Becky's so relatable that it's going to be entertaining, but really it has so much content in it as well. All right, well, let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is Sue Marriott with Therapist Uncensored, and we are so excited to bring you. This is going to be fun because Becky Mendeville is...
Oh, no, not my last name.
Yeah, you're out now. She is going to be talking to us about... we've been doing all this attachment stuff. All these therapists are like, how about the glial cells and blah, blah, blah. And Becky's going to bring us down to reality. So anybody who is either new to this or, is not in a clinical setting, wants to apply, these are, knows these are great ideas, but wants to apply it to real world life, right? Becky is going to be our truth teller and bring us down to reality and really talk about it in plain language so that, we're not just speaking to the choir, right?
Right. And also we don't have that limited perspective of someone who's involved in a romantic relationship.
Exactly. Okay.
I'm, what is it? Actively
not, you're a single person, not looking for a relationship.
Not actively dating. So I'm a single, not actively dating person. Not actively looking for a relationship.
That's right. And honestly, we have gotten several, by the way, thank you listeners, because we have gotten feedback about yeah, that's great for people in relationship, but there are a lot of other people out here.
Yes. As I'm listening to your podcast, I'm thinking to myself, how can I adjust what they're saying to someone who isn't in a romantic relationship? So I'm trying to make those adjustments as you guys are talking about it on the podcast. And so I think, that you have some...
We've got so much to learn. That's right. And so Becky's going to help us bring it down to real world, because I totally agree with you. I've noticed that even when we start out about dating or whatever, if you notice, there's all this bias towards relationship and romantic relationship. So we're leaving out a huge, vibrant segment of the world.
Right. And it's easy to make the adjustment, for someone who's not in a romantic relationship, but it would be nice not to have to do that, right?
Yes.
It would be nice to have a podcast that focuses on people who just want to improve relationships in general.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship.
Not dating relationships. Right. Amen, sister.
Relationships. So I've used it to work on relationships with my daughter.
Wow. Okay. Let's just... You want to just start there? So you're a single mom.
Yes, I'm a single mom, working professional.
Yeah.
My daughter's in high school, so that's a challenge in and of itself. And so I thought I would do some fun.
And so you're learning about this attachment stuff, and probably it's producing great paranoia.
Oh, sure.
As a parent.
I think that was the first experience with listening to the podcast and learning about attachment. I had to turn it off just because it was so much.
Oh my gosh, me too. When I was reading it, it was just like, oh God, it's like a shame experience.
It is. It was like, I know I'm blue. I know it. Stop telling me how blue I am and how awful I am.
Okay, so shall we slow down?
Oh yes.
And so
I don't know anything other than blue. All the science and terminology behind that.
Tell the audience what your understanding of blue is.
Oh. My understanding of blue is a little avoidant, probably very avoidant. And one of the things I really took away from the episode you did on that blue part of the spectrum is that you think you're okay. You think you're cool and independent and
Doesn't that suck?
That was like the worst part of it. It was like somebody threw a bucket of cold water in my face. I was like, well, I thought I was really independent.
Secure.
I know. Like, I don't need anybody's help. And I'm awesome. Like, that's so
Have you seen the
perfect.
video of the shot with a guy on the cliff or whatever, and he's by himself, and it's talking about the blue, and he's like, I'm totally good. I'm good out here.
I'm perfect.
And then the
Who
next,
wouldn't want to be me?
I know. And then the next scene is like, it's getting a little chilly out here. Maybe I should head
I
back.
have no one.
Okay, so the video, let's slow down. So the video is one that is available on YouTube from Therapists Uncensored, and it does the basics. If you're new to this and you have no idea what blue is, there's a short video that's going to bring you up to date. But in general, the idea is we are taking attachment and the research from attachment, instead of putting it in the annals of research, that we are bringing it to the public, which basically means we want to make it usable. And in order to make it usable, we need to think of it not as a researcher, but as a clinician, or as Becky's saying, it's just a person in the world. It's not a clinician at all, but like, how can this stuff be useful? So we put it on a spectrum, and there are several episodes, and we're going to reference these in the show notes that give you the background to this. But I'm going to give you a one sentence gist, which is that the science that backs this is very profound, but the general idea is that this is the way we've interpreted it. This is a Therapist Uncensored version, putting on a spectrum. The blue is what Becky's talking about, which is the avoidant side of the attachment spectrum.
And that's on one end of the spectrum,
That's
right?
Right. And as a matter of fact, by the way, quick side note, Becky actually helped us do some of the graphics for
I
some
did
of
the
that.
graphic for the spectrum, the
That's
attachment
right.
spectrum.
That's right. And it's been really sweet because she's...
And I still don't remember
exactly
what the exact terminology is, but I just remember the spectrum.
See, and since she worked on it in such detail, we know it's obviously not that clear. And so we're going to keep coming back over and over and trying to like make it as understandable as possible.
I just think it's a lot to digest. I think that the concept of you're on this side and it means this, and then the middle means this, and then the red side means something else. I think that's really understandable, but breaking down those pieces is what's really helpful.
I totally agree. And that's part of why we wanted to bring Becky on the air, because I felt like she could speak for so many people of you listening that are like,
I'm not a
"What?"
therapist by
That's
trade.
Like, what the heck? So again, the one sentence thing is like the blue is on the avoidant side, which basically means...
I just bristled a little bit when you said avoidant.
See? There you go. Basically, it means it's folks that have had an experience usually, and again, we're not blaming parents. This is not a parent blaming
I
forum.
blame my parents.
But because probably they had their parents, and we could run it all the way up
yes,
the
it goes all
generational
the way
line,
back.
right? So this isn't promoting any problems like that, but it really is more promoting empathy. Like if you had a parent that wasn't comfortable with affect and wasn't comfortable with soothing and comfort and feelings, then you learn to basically reduce your feeling sense and instead like get in your head and be like, I'm fine, everything's good. Pull myself up by the bootstraps. These are parents that might say, oh yeah, I'll give you something to cry about.
I heard that all the time when I was growing up.
See? And she says she's blue.
What's so weird is that I have a really good relationship with my parents now, but growing up, it was very much about like, you want something to cry about? I mean, it was very much, I had that, I think, blue experience. And I find that thinking back on it now, despite the fact that I tried to be the best parent and I knew the research on being a parent and what was important at what stages of growth my daughter was at, I still, listening to your podcast, I can think back and think, oh, well, I might have been a little bit of a blue parent to my daughter, despite all my best intentions.
It is so vexing.
Like, I remember my daughter, I remember thinking she's being so clingy. And that's horrible because I'm passing that on to her, right?
It is so vexing. I so appreciate you saying this. And also, but not in a self-abusive sort of way. Like, this is so unconscious, and it's basically the Petri dish that we're raised in. And Becky, I totally am right in your boat. Like, even though I could teach this and I might be doing parenting classes and teaching about attachment, I might come home and be like, I'm tired, blah, blah, blah. You know, like
It's just so ingrained, I think.
it is the cinnamon and the cinnamon roll. So it's very hard to see, and it just permeates.
Plus, you don't want to take the cinnamon out of the cinnamon roll. That's really good.
Oh, I love that, though. And that's part of what we're saying is it's not dysfunctional. Here's an example. Since we're talking about blue, let's just stay there for a minute. Again, that's the side that might reduce affect, meaning feelings and emotion. And as a matter of fact, we might be suspect of it and like feel threatened, if we're honest, when someone's highly emotional. And we might do a lot of eye roll and dismissiveness and even be degrading at times. Like it's not cool to be it's not cool to be, irrational.
I know. I've been nodding the whole time that you've been talking because it's so true. Like the eye rolling. Oh, I just can't stand it. What is wrong with these people?
Exactly. But where we got that from was probably when we shrink ourselves to 2, 3, actually 1, 2, we may have been eye rolled at, and yet we were only a wild amygdala, meaning that, again, those of you that are familiar with the neuroscience, we didn't have any kind of regulatory function in our mind or in our nervous system. And we were relying on our parents to be the ones to soothe us. And so if our parents, unfortunately, had the experience that we're talking about, that Becky and I are talking about, where there was a little bit of a like, why are you crying?
Right. Well, my parents were both educators, so they were teachers. They had students all day long, and then they had to come home to 4 kids. I mean, I can just imagine that they just kind of try to tamp us down a little bit and be like, we don't really want to hear.
We don't do this emotion thing.
Right. We want you to be, seen and not heard and that whole kind of thing. So I get it. And I don't blame them.
Totally. And this is not a parent blaming thing. However, if you can notice in Becky's language, that probably somebody who had a more secure experience, if you don't mind me saying, because again, I'm in your boat, right? Entirely. I had a mom that worked full time. I had a disabled parent. So my experience was that I was overwhelming. I was too much. So you've drunk the Kool-Aid.
Right.
It's like, of course it would be too much. But I can almost guarantee you that there are tons of families where that they go to work and they're enriched by their work.
And they come home
and then they
happy
come
and excited.
home and they're like really looking forward to seeing their kids, and they have the delight and the excitement, and that's a very natural thing. So it's just, it's so much in the soup.
Yep.
And again, I'm really relating to you because in my adult relationships, my biggest difficulty is like believing that people want to be with me and that I'm not a problem and that I'm not a burden. It's just in the Petri dish. It's just how it is.
Isn't it awful though that we're just conditioned now to kind of try to be no trouble and
that's right.
Try to be even keel.
And then as you're pointing out with your child, as you're also trying to unconsciously sort of pass that along, it's like, oh, shake it off. You're fine. Everything's okay. And partly because that was how we made it and made it okay. And so we want our kids to be, it's not an unloving thing. And this is really important. So if any of you are identifying with this blue side of the spectrum, it's like, I think your parents were really trying to toughen you up and deal with the world. We're not throwing your parents under the bus at all. But at the same time, we are trying to be empathic about the experience of when you just are a kid and you need something and somebody's telling you to brush it off. It can be a real miss.
Yeah, I think it's tough because I know my parents love me.
Yes.
Because of how much care they gave to my upbringing and trips and all that kind of thing. But, on a day-to-day basis, it was more like try to be the least amount of trouble as you possibly can.
Fed, watered, sleep.
Right, exactly. I had the basic necessities.
Once the Excel spreadsheet is check, check. We're good.
And then after that, that's it. I was on my own. Don't ask me for anything else.
So Becky, say more about what you've heard and how you've applied it.
Oh, I had so much fun. So initially I said, I think it's interesting. My first reaction to finding out that I was part of the blue spectrum.
The blue club.
I was part of the blue club.
Oh my gosh, we should have a club.
It was so interesting to me because I was listening to the podcast that you did on that blue side of the spectrum. Avoidant, I guess is what you call it.
Avoidant, dismissive. Indigo. I had a client come in and tell me, hey,
Indigo.
I heard that. I am not blue. You think I'm blue, but I'm actually indigo.
It's a little bit better than blue.
Exactly. That's kind of the point, is that you're not only one thing, that it is a gradient.
Yeah, that's so true though. I don't want to diverge too much, but I listened to the blue I call it the
You identify with
podcast.
it. This is empowering for you.
I call it the Blue Podcast. So I listened to the Blue Podcast and I was like, oh my God, I'm dismissive and avoidant. And I turned it off. I couldn't listen to it anymore. Once I realized, when I heard you say, you're independent and you think you got everything covered, but like you really don't, was what I was hearing. I was like, oh shit. I like literally turned it off. I was like, I can't listen anymore. This is
like,
me.
Sue Marriott, you need to just.
Oh my God. I was so overwhelmed. I was like, I suck. I turned it off. Then I was talking to someone that same weekend and they're like, oh yeah, I was listening to the podcast and I totally identified with the blue. And I was like, what? I did too. And so like, it was so weird to talk to somebody who had listened to the podcast, the same one I had just listened to. And they related in the same exact way that I did. It was really nice. And so it kind of, I think, got me back to the podcast to listen to the rest of it.
Well, let me ask you this, Becky. Did it feel shaming in how we described it? Like, it's why you needed to turn it off. Did you have a shame experience?
I don't think I felt shamed. You know what I remember feeling was overwhelmed. So it wasn't a shaming feeling, but I did feel so overwhelmed with...
It sounds like insight, like you were beginning to reflect.
Yeah, like all of a sudden I realized, oh shit, like I don't have it all together. It's all a facade.
Amen, sister.
It's all a facade. I'm not independent. I don't know what zipped up is what you like to say. And that like broke my heart a little bit. And I felt like such a failure. Here I was. I thought I had it all together. I don't need anybody's help. I am doing my own thing and I got it under control.
Relationships. I don't need anything for anybody.
Friends, whatever. Friends are only good for margaritas. But then I realized it was actually something that maybe needed a little bit of adjustment, maybe some work. And so that's what this conversation with a friend who said she was also blue, had the same kind of experience, a really similar experience to me, made me go back to the podcast and think, well, maybe I need to keep listening and find out, do I have a chance at surviving?
Is there any hope for me whatsoever?
Yes. Can I overcome this blueness?
Okay, so we can freeze. So notice that as someone who identifies as blue, that when you get emotionally upset, what did you do?
I shut it down.
Ah!
I said, bye-bye.
Okay.
I don't need you.
Exactly. Screw you, podcast.
Right. Fuck you. I'm not blue. Being blue is awesome.
Right. So just notice, like, this is actually a really important point. This is what we do. When we're on the blue side and we begin to get affectively wound up, our impulse is to just turn off whatever's happening. And then we can go right back to comfort. So you're making a really important point. But then with support and with help and with talking to somebody,
I mean, it always helps,
re-engage.
right? It always helps to have someone be able to, like, you can relate to, like, oh my God, I'm not the only one feeling this way.
That's right.
And so I went back and I listened to the rest of the podcast, and thank God I did. I'm not trying to plug Therapists Uncensored podcast.
That'd be okay with me.
Listen to it all the time. So I went back and listened to it, and thankfully, they had some advice for like how you can kind of tips for how to relate with people in your life who might not understand what it means to be in that blue zone of the attachment spectrum. And honestly, it sounds really silly. I feel silly saying it, but it really did kind of change my life, and maybe not my life, but my perspective. It really, really did. And I was so excited because I decided to try this little experiment with my daughter. And I think in the podcast...
So your daughter is how old?
She's 16.
Okay.
And it's just her and I. And she's living with me like 95% of the time. And one of my big fears is that she's going to be like me. I mean, you know, because I'm, you know, a little blue. a little closed off, a little zipped up.
This is a super important point that you're making, Becky, is like the unconscious intergenerational transmission of attachment issues.
Yeah, so that's a whole other topic, I think. But anyway, so I thought I would try this experiment with my daughter, which is actually kind of fun. In the podcast, they suggested, and this is my interpretation, I could have it a little bit wrong, but they suggested that instead of being like a little bit cold or a little bit off-putting to people in your life, you guys talked about romantic partners, but I related it to my daughter, was to actually be like welcoming and happy and, and engaging instead of just a little closed off. So for about a week, when my daughter got home from school, she was getting home later than me because of her extracurricular activities. But so when she got home, I was home already, and she walked in the door, and I would just be really happy, so happy to see her. And
you belong to me.
Oh my gosh.
You belong in this family.
Yes, I haven't seen you in so long. It's so good to see you. And I would say, hey, how was your day? And sometimes, depending on the situation, I would go up and I would give her a hug. And I would say, how are you? How was your day? With a smile on my face. And it was sincere. I wasn't play acting.
No.
But I really had to put
But you
myself.
were consciously
like
making it more explicit than you might otherwise.
Right. Before, it was kind of implicit. Of course I was happy to have her home.
Right.
She's my
and so
daughter.
you might give her the head nod.
Right. Like, hey, no, actually, usually when she would get home, I'd be like, complaining about something.
Oh, that's so great.
Like,
You're so insightful.
What's that stain on your shirt? What happened? I mean, or she'd give me her lunch bag and I'd be like, you didn't eat your lunch? What's wrong with you?
I so love what you're saying. It's so real and honest.
Yeah. So anyway, what was super exciting about doing this experiment was she was in such an amazing mood. And honestly, I feel like I'm making some crazy plug, like an infomercial or something, but it was really true. And I was so excited to tell Anne and Sue that their podcast works. I was so excited to give them a testimonial, because what I did with my daughter and being happy to see her when she got home from school and enthusiastically greeting her when she came in the door, it totally changed how she was afterwards. Sitting around at home after dinner, doing her homework, she just was happy. I could see it in her demeanor, and it was crazy.
I'm just so touched hearing you say this. And this is nothing about an infomercial. This is really about something that has moved you in your heart, and that you can feel as your heart opens, that there's neural Wi-Fi. You can feel her heart opening.
Right.
That's so.
It's almost something you can't
vulnerable.
Describe, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know my daughter, and you don't know that I could tell the differences. But I mean, I think anyone who's a parent.
Believe me, I think there's listeners all over the world that are nodding with you right now, and they know exactly what you're talking about.
I mean, honestly, I feel like I was some crazy lab technician doing some weird experiment. I hate the thought of doing social experiments with my daughter, but it was so rewarding, actually.
Yeah, and you have more to say about work as another experiment that Becky did. But when I have gone to schools and talked about this, and I gave the silly example. I just so love what you're saying, Becky. It's so grounded and real world. And I had given this example of, I'm learning this stuff. And again, it's not naturally in my body. I'm having to top down, do it just like you. It's not natural, but when you do it, you can feel it feels really different. And my son was young, and I had said, okay, you can play at whatever, 8:20, we are going to bed. So you can play, you've got between now and now to play. And so I come in at say 8:20 or 8:15 or something. And I'm like, okay, let's wrap it up. And he burst into tears. And he's just like, but I'm not ready, And because of this training, right? My natural thing would be well, tough. I'm, I want to go to bed. You have, yep. But instead, so I'm like, well, what do you mean you're not ready? And so I began to try to join him and try to find out what his experience was. And basically what I understood at that point was that he had spent this whole time setting up his Lego scene to play. And so that wasn't counting as playing, right? And so he was really upset because he didn't get to play. But from my perspective, he's in there putting his toys, his guys where they want them.
Well,
and blah,
also
blah, blah.
As a parent, you're looking forward to that 8:20 time
exactly,
frame where
or
you could put
8:30
your
or whatever.
kid to sleep.
So with the change I made was instead of countering him or just setting the boundary or what have you, I really made this conscious effort to see it from his eyes. And I'm like, oh, you thought you were going to get to set up the whole scene and get really set where all the army guys were ready to whatever. It was Lord of the Rings. They were all going to be able to, the goblins, and they were going to do their thing. And then I interrupted you. So you're naturally upset about that because then it feels like you didn't get to play at all. Whereas from my perspective, it was just about the clock.
Right.
And when the clock hit the thing,
that's when you teach them about time management.
Right, exactly. But what was different was I took the time to slow down and be like, oh, I get why you're upset.
Him.
Like, of course. And then I could comfort him. I was like, oh, that's so disappointing because now you can't play it all out. And then we were able to problem solve about like, let's save it just as it is. And then let's wake up maybe a little early so you can keep it going. Like I was so much better, but I really, just like you, Becky, I had to like shift into this other way of relating instead of it being like, oh, he's challenging my authority or like just some of these just more limiting beliefs. It's like, let me first really get in his shoes and like really understand he's not just defying me. He really had a different experience of what was happening. And it was only like just like you, I had to like, it wasn't what came up naturally. And I really had to like almost like get myself to stop the natural impulse and to really like bridge over.
You didn't want to be like that soldier who says, you know, tough.
Yeah, and no, not surprisingly, I was raised by a military father.
But you overcame that.
Exactly. So this is a very hopeful message. And so you had a work example, I think.
Oh, yeah. So, well, of course, not being happy to just try it out at home, I had to, I found other ways to think about people in my life that I spend a lot of time with whose relationships could improve, that relationships I had with people that could improve. And I thought about my office.
Well, and as a serious blue person, you might not think about that very often, right?
No.
You just want to do your task at work and be left alone.
But your podcast made me realize like that's not the place I need to be. As comfortable as it is for me, I know that it's not exactly like a productive.
Yeah, it can be kind of isolating.
It is actually completely isolating. And what's interesting is that at work in our office, I am a little bit isolated from the rest of our group.
Do you mean physically, like how things are set up? Yeah.
Yeah. So
that actually that's a really great point.
Really interesting.
It makes a really important difference.
It really does, because sometimes I get people coming over to my side of the building and they're like, just wanted to come over and make sure you were okay.
Right,
we haven't seen you in a while.
So when we think of that in attachment world, like that's a bid for connection.
It's a what?
It's a bid for connection.
Oh.
It's like, it's not really that they thought you were dead or something, right? It's like, I think of like a little fern tendril.
But a blue person wouldn't be their first instinct.
Duh, I'm not dead.
Right? I'm so happy in my little corner of the world where nobody
Why are you bothering
comes.
me?
It's like, really? You thought I was dead? Because I'm so happy here. I've got my window. You don't understand. This is beautiful.
So that's all what she's describing is this auto-regulatory, you're in your own kind of autistic world. No, I'm not, right. I'm with you 100%.
Are you labeling me now?
No, not at all. But it's part of it. What I'm saying is like, there's many people I know that are identifying with both of us, and that like, hey, how are you? Like, that we don't quite understand.
Yeah.
What is the incoming? There's an incoming something. Do you need something from me?
I know, right? You were coming over here because I don't understand.
I already texted you my
I know, right? I've sent you like 8 emails today. You know I'm here.
Okay, so that was the old. Now what is the new?
That was the old. Okay, so in my job, I'm supposed to collaborate with a lot of people, but of course, because of the industry I work in, we do a lot of collaboration via email. But I decided that I was going to start going over and talking to people that I work with.
Dun, dun, dun.
I know. So bleeding edge is what I'm doing. And so I would go.
Wait. Bleeding
edge.
Bleeding?
I'm not sure why bleeding is the word.
Oh my gosh.
Because leading edge is not enough. It has to be bleeding.
Oh, okay. Listeners, pay attention. This is so awesome. This is exactly.
Well, maybe the cutting edge. So cutting edge isn't enough. It has to bleed. We want blood. Bleeding edge.
That's right. Because we're not sick unless we have a fever or have lost an arm.
Or you're bleeding out and
exactly.
You almost can't be
You
saved.
have to like have something to point to. It can't just be that like,
Look at the blood. That's proof.
Oh, Lordy.
It's horrible. I know. Okay. It's almost as bad as synergy, I think.
Synergy?
Have you've heard synergy, I hope.
I don't know what
synergistic. No? You're not
I
in
know the
corporate
word,
world.
but I don't know how you're referring to it.
It's horrible. People want to come and create synergies with us. It's so useless.
Is that kind of like morale?
As a blue person, I'm like, I don't need synergy. I just got to do my job, and I'm good.
What is my task?
I
My
know.
Excel spreadsheet.
Check.
You are getting in the
Check.
way of my Excel
Check.
spreadsheet. Synergy does not fit in any
You told
category.
me what I had to do. I wasn't told synergy was part of it.
Change my job description and
If
increase my
synergy-
salary.
If synergy had been part of it, I would not have taken this job. But, you got to get out and see people, and it'll change your life.
Wait, hold on. So here's a blue person listening, right?
Okay.
And they're like, yeah, they're totally identifying. Yeah, what is the problem? What are all these needy people?
I'm fine over here.
Okay, so you're having this after experience. What is that?
What after experience?
After your insight into the
after
value of synergy.
You mean when I saw the light and I was
Yes.
walking towards the light?
Ding, 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 ding.
Okay, so when I saw the light, started walking towards the light, I realized I needed to get out and engage my coworkers, my colleagues. Not because my brain was telling
Not
me.
because your Excel spreadsheet said go engage
Not
your
because
colleagues.
I wanted to engage with my colleagues. I just felt like maybe that would help me get to the green zone, which is supposedly the place to be, right? It's nirvana, is what I hear.
Nirvana.
So I was like, okay, well, actually, it was all about the experiment.
Okay.
Like, let me see how this experiment would go. So I decided I was going to go to work and I was going to, log into my workstation. And then I was going to go out into the world and see what my colleagues were doing. So I went over to their side of the office. And
You physically walked over.
I actually walked over. I put tennis shoes on first. Because I didn't want to, wear out my wedges. So I put my tennis shoes and walked over to that side of the building. And I was like, hey, guys, how's it going? And I would go and I would...
And they were like,
Who are you?
You work here?
I forgot what you look like. You don't look like your picture
You're like,
on the
am I in
screen.
trouble?
Yes. And then my boss was like, what are you doing over there? Get back to your area. No, but so I walked over there and I would just go check in with people. I had a reason to check in with them because we were working on projects together. So I would go over to one person. I'd be like, hey, how's it going with this? Blah, 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 blah. And we would talk face to face, which was odd.
But did you find that enjoyable? Be honest.
I'm thinking about it,
Be honest.
right? I have to think about it. Was it enjoyable? I think it was rewarding.
Okay. That's different.
So, yeah,
That's
right? So I'm
true.
not going to actually make the stretch to enjoyable
Okay.
probably, but I think it's rewarding.
It was value added.
You know what's really weird, actually, is that I find now that I really like talking to people face to face. And sometimes I get annoyed when they're not at the office and they're working from home.
Oh my God. Your need is activated.
Right. I'm like, what? You're working from home today? That's such bullshit.
Right. So okay. So if we translate that might be that you're a little disappointed that you may have been hoping for a little contact.
Sometimes it's important, right, to look someone in the eye and say, why the fuck didn't you get this done on time? You were supposed to have gotten this done a week ago. What's going on? And then they can't lie to you because they're looking right at your face.
Right. But I think where you were actually headed was that you were looking forward to seeing them. And that you may have been a little disappointed.
It's making a really big stretch.
All right. Obviously, we still have more work to do.
You know
However,
I enjoy working with people and being part of a team. And I think that so much more work gets done when you can communicate face to face because there's a back and forth. There's a really nice back and forth that happens when you're talking to a person directly. That doesn't happen when you're emailing or IMing or whatever you're doing. It doesn't happen when you're face to face. And now I find that I'm disappointed when I can't talk to someone face to face.
okay, so I'm going to risk something and add something if that's okay. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. But here's what I was thinking was if you notice, it's easier to make it about productivity. It's more effective right? To
Are
work.
you therapizing me?
No. But it's so great because it's live, right? That like, but when I pushed and said, oh, you were disappointed, like, because as a good blue person, it's like, that's not our language. That's not how we think. That's not how we experience it. And so then I'm putting something into you that isn't yours.
Right. It's productive. It wasn't enjoyable.
It was not enjoyable.
Productive.
So I love like you're discerning, like actually there's value and there's interest, and you're noticing an expansion and an interest in other people and the value of FaceTime.
I totally get that now. And also, not just with talking to people face to face, but I'm also, I feel like such a loser, but I'm also so much more open to making phone calls. Like before I would avoid a phone call at all costs. And now when I see a phone number pop up on my screen, I think, oh, this might be like something I need to take because, it's always, and this person, I would not have said this a little while back, but sometimes it's really important to just talk to someone.
Pick up the phone. Becky, I promise you, we've got a ton and a wildly amazing number of listeners. We're so happy. Thanks to each of you. But I promise you, at least, like, what's the statistic? A whole bunch, a big percentage.
That's a very
good
statistic.
Right. But why I'm saying that is I want to be inclusive is because, again, we do it on a spectrum, and at any moment, any of us could be. So I really feel like so many people are nodding with you and are so appreciative of you giving voice to actually how it feels.
Yeah. But you know what's interesting, though, is as I was listening to your Blue podcast, while I appreciated it, and I wanted more, actually, I felt like I need more. Like, tell me more about this. When I was listening to your podcast on the red side of the spectrum, I really found myself identifying with that part, too. So I felt a little bit like I had a split personality. And then, I guess I kind of realized like if it's a spectrum, right, then we kind of, at any given time, depending on the circumstances, you might fall anywhere on that spectrum. I'm probably I don't know if I'm ever going to be in the green zone, but so I just slip right past that green. I go to blue.
That's our t-shirt. You're going to get the t-shirt that says earn security, which is the green. But Becky, I'm just like so in heaven right now because you're making all of our points for us, which is that the reason we put it from a category that you are avoidant or you are preoccupied is we're wanting to change the language to make it not pathological. Blue and red and all that stuff.
What do you mean by pathological?
Like, if I'm a dismissive person, that makes me feel a little defensive.
Right.
Versus like, I tend towards the blue side.
Also just labels in general, right?
That's
it's
exactly
like,
right.
Don't call me dismissive.
That's right.
I'm not that person.
It's not an identity.
Something.
Right. We're actually, as clinicians, we really want to move out. Like, part of what we're doing is we're mining the research, and the research has to have categories. But what we're doing is we're translating it into, no, we aren't just one thing. And you're making that point so well. It's like, as you listen to the red, you're red. You can identify that. Well, that's what we're saying. That's why we put it on a continuum. It's like, in certain circumstances, and this is where we can begin to learn about ourselves. When do we tend towards red? Like, so for me, I'll give you an example, is that like if I'm mildly aroused or threatened, like if it's just minor.
What would be like a threatening event for a blue person?
Well, let's just say, I don't want to be a blue person, right? Or I don't want you to be a blue person, but you might tend towards blue.
Right.
That's different.
Uh-huh. That's where you kind of live.
That's right. But what I'm saying is that like, if the threat that and again, we're
maybe
usually
like a social situation, because I know that's what makes me feel threatened is someone inviting me to a party where I don't know.
Right. It's a mild threat, but it is
right.
But it's going to then activate you into more red. Because now you're like interested in connecting, but you're nervous about it. Is that right?
Right. Like
so
anxious.
if it's a mild threat, that's how it is for me. Like if I'm mildly threatened, I'm going to get more preoccupied. But the higher threat, and we don't typically say, "Oh, I'm being threatened right now." We just enact the blue and we enact the red. So, but what we're trying to do is help you be more conscious. And if you could see me, I'm like flipping my hands together, like I'm done with you. It's kind of like what it's Becky turning off the podcast.
Right.
It's
I gotta go now.
I gotta go now is a higher, for me, I think everybody's a little different, but for me, the higher threat, I'm going to go to blue. The lower threat, I will tend to get a little more preoccupied. And that holds true for the kids. the research on the kids is like, if they have hope that the parent will come back, then they're going to be more red if we're insecure. But if we don't have hope at all, if we've just like, this is too painful,
right.
It's too hard, then we're going to shut all the way off and be like, I don't need you at all. Screw this whole thing.
Is there a color for that?
Screw the... Well, that's the blue. That's the blue.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah. And so I'm mixing, for those of you that are a little more like following all of this, we're using this spectrum, but we're also adding polyvagal theory and arousal to this. And
That's
basically,
it's a lot of information to process.
Becky's like, don't do it, Sue.
So,
don't
like, if we're looking at the spectrum right now, and we see the blue over here on the left, right?
Because left brain, Excel spreadsheet,
Cold.
linear, logical,
Cold-ish.
It's more thinking.
And then,
Tin Man
as it goes
and Wizard of
across,
Oz.
the green is in the middle.
Yep.
And the green is like
Integrated.
Angels
Perfect.
singing,
Exactly.
and the light, the sun is always shining.
Yeah, and again,
bright.
and the greens are
Butterflies and unicorns.
But it doesn't mean that we're so happy. It simply means that when
We're not
when crap,
activated.
Well, when crap happens, we can be dismissive or be avoid. We're flexible. The more you're close to the middle, you're flexible in
So
how
if
you
you're
respond.
in the green zone,
Yeah.
and some like shit hits the fan,
Right.
what are you going to do?
Well, again, it depends on the shit. But like, for example, a secure person, which is what Becky's saying is in the green zone, gets into graduate school, works really hard to get there. Guess what it does? It makes you preoccupied because your whole job is to figure out what it is the professors want from you and to give it to them. So that's just an example of like, you're still a secure person, but you're going to get very attuned outside of yourself. And
So what if you're a secure person and you're in the workplace and you get a promotion and you get activated because of the expectations that are put on you, or?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. So if we have been raised in the green, then even if we get a little preoccupied or a little blue, if we get a little red or a little blue, or if we get a little bit where we're more reserved and we hold our cards close to our chest, or if we get a little more activated, the idea is that we're flexible and we're doing that based on the environment, and that very quickly as the environment resolves, we're going to move right back to green and be able to go like, oh, I got really nervous.
Okay, so it's totally
It's
normal
flexible.
to be kind
move.
of in your natural state that you're in the green zone.
That's right, but move.
if stuff happens, you might go red or towards the red or towards the blue
And that's healthy.
for a little bit.
That's considered healthy.
And then you kind of regulate and
That's
get
right.
back in your natural state of green or whatever.
That's exactly right.
So I don't have to necessarily be worried as a parent if of course I want my daughter to be in the green zone, right? Because I want to feel like I've done a decent
that
job.
she's integrated.
Right?
Thoughts and feelings.
But if it's finals and she's stressing about her grades and, tests and all this stuff, she's going to go a little bit to the red or a little bit to the blue.
That's exactly
or
right.
whatever works for her.
And teenagers,
And
by
it's
the
normal.
way, it's completely normal. What you're relying on is, can she turn to you as a secure base? And like when she's in trouble, does she talk to you? Or does she find another secure? Because as they get older, it's not always us. It might be a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whoever. But basically, can she use relationships?
Does she have someone to talk to?
Yeah. Is she able to return to someone that she feels safe with?
So what would it look like if she didn't have that person or people in her life?
Well, that might be where there's more, like what we're describing is that like if you can fluidly move along the whole spectrum, you're in good shape. But as we get further out to the edges, more and more blue, more and more bright red, we get more inflexible. And so basically what that's a sign of is that how we see ourselves and how we see relationships is kind of monotone. And we distort it a little bit. So somebody might say, hey, babe, I love you. And they might hear they're just saying that because they know that I'm mad. Or you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like things get distorted. And there's not so much flexibility. It gets either like amoeba-like on one side or very.
And does that go back? I mean, once like maybe the threat or the uncomfortable, like stressful situation gets removed, would that go back? Or would they still hang out in that area?
Well, if you're actually talking about true attachment disruptions, we will kind of gravitate. And we're not even talking about disorganized at this
Attachment disruption would be something like your parent leaving or a divorce or something like that? Or
those are possibilities for sure that can cause some. But really, attachment disruptions happen between 0 and 2.
Oh, okay.
Very early. So it's it's basically
So if my daughter's life was stable and pretty happy between 0 and 2, I don't have to worry about her.
I know your daughter and love her dearly, and she's a very solid kid. And
thank God those 0 to 2 years were pretty good.
Yeah,
then.
exactly. And also, even if your 0 to 2 was difficult, our brains are very plastic and we can continue to grow. And what we want to do is hang out more in the green more often. And then as we shift red or blue, like sort of understand more like, oh, I'm really nervous.
Do you need to really focus to make sure that the hanging out in the green is happening? I mean, that's like a goal of yours with making sure life isn't too stressful as much as possible?
So Becky, I think your story is the most beautiful story of like the beginning of this. Like you can have more and that you didn't even know that you needed more. But like as you gain more of like this interpersonal connection, you can find it rewarding. So I think that's where we're going with all of this, is that like if we tend to be a little more in our head, we get to feel more vulnerable with people and feel safe. And then if we're a little bit more like chaotic and amoeba and up on the ceiling, that we also get to feel more grounded with ourselves. And we don't have to have that person validate that we're okay. So that's the rough idea. So all of that is fantastic. And I love these examples. And one of the things Becky was really proud of is like, I can't remember if we said this already at the beginning, but like this is about single people that aren't looking for romance, but that have real relationships in the world, and that this science can impact everybody, not just, it's really not about just romantic relationships. We can also apply this up like to our parents and down to our kids.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Podcast.
And there's another podcast that we mentioned. All of this we'll put in our notes, but about aging and attachment, and how that, again, our attachment issues get stirred up more when we're in threat. So it's not like when everything's good, we probably all look pretty good, but it's actually when there's threat. So when people age and their bodies begin to lose function and their minds begin to get looser, their attachment stuff comes up again, just like in a breakup or birth of a child, or, our child hitting the age we were when we had our trauma. All those things will reignite the attachment issues. It doesn't mean that you haven't worked on them in therapy and that you haven't done great work. It just means it's another. I think of it like, instead of like a circle, like, oh, I'm good. Oh, crap, I'm bad. Oh, I'm good again. I think of it more like a corkscrew. So like, I'm good. And then like, oh, I'm in the dumps and all these things are happening to me. But when I come back out of it, I've moved forward because I've learned from there, and I come back out at a different place. And even if I go back down, it's progressive, and I'm mapping my internal world better. And I'm also mapping you, Becky, better, and people close to me better, so that I can feel more secure in the world. So if you don't respond to my text, I'm not going to be like, Becky hates me. I might say, Becky's a little overwhelmed, and this is what Becky does.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the corkscrew time, because when I was in college...
Because we want to have a glass of wine? Is that why?
Well, what it made me think of was when I was in college and I was taking classes on literary theory, it seemed like we always defined female time as cyclical and male time as linear. But now you're introducing this concept of a corkscrew, which I think is super, super interesting, because, I do
non-binary.
I do think that it's not just as simple as linear. So I think linear might be linear with some hills or something.
Man, mic drop. You just did great. I mean, because everything's going right towards non-binary, really, like all these different places. And so this idea of the attachment spectrum is the same thing, right? That there's nothing linear and there's nothing circular.
Right.
It's both.
It's a hybrid, right?
It's a hybrid. That's right.
I feel kind of silly doing it, but it seems like spectrum applies to so many things. I listened to this interview where they were talking about psychosis being a spectrum also. So, you're not just psychotic or not psychotic. It's a spectrum of psychosis.
Yeah, I definitely have been psychotic in moments in my life.
It's not that easy. You can't just say... And right. I think that goes for everything. Sexuality, you name it.
That's right. Gender. And just to wrap up, like, that's a really great example of like why that the blue saying like, I'm good. What's the problem? That you can hear now that it's deactivating curiosity. It's deactivating the spectrum by just brushing your hands and like, what? I'm healthy. What's the problem?
Well, yeah, like when you talk about, zipped up, like imagine being zipped up in your mummy sleeping bag
Exactly.
and you have no exposure to the world at all.
Zipped up
You're
in your
good.
mummy. Exactly.
But you're also not getting anything.
You're not.
in.
There's nothing else happening. There's no continuum there, right?
Right.
It's this isolated. So we are ruining blue for so many people in this moment, just like it's been ruined for you.
Right.
They say the AA ruins drinking.
You cannot
This
hide
podcast
anymore.
is going to ruin avoidant attachment.
There'll be no more zippers.
And on that note, I think you have been so wonderful to make this point from a different perspective. We so appreciate you, Becky Mendeville.
Why do you keep calling my name out like that?
Because I want the world to know.
I'm going to get all these Facebook friend requests now. I don't know what I'm going to do.
So if you would like to find Becky Mendeville, you can
I'm not
check
on
the
Facebook.
show notes and we'll see if whether or not she actually adds her contact information
Yes,
or
please
not.
check out my Bumble profile. And
And you know what you all should do? You should all like try to find her and like give her kisses on the cheek or just like adore her and stuff to like mess with her blue status.
I'm not zipped up in the sleeping bag, but I'm still just a little zipped up.
So we're working on that. And thank you so much, Becky, for sharing the influence that this podcast has had, but also for really, I think that you have inspired so many people right now. I can almost imagine the letters we're going to get. We get them after most podcasts. And also for our listeners, those of you who have been writing and encouraging us, it means so much to us. And this is why we're doing this. This is why we brought Becky on. This is a labor of love, and we hope that to continue. And honestly, I have to tell you, there's been several messages that we've gotten that were basically they were lost in space. But in particular, there's some people from Turkey that have reached out to us. We want to say thank you. I can't tell you how meaningful it is to us that what we've been producing has really impacted people. So we really want to let you know that we're hearing that and we appreciate it. So if this is new to you, then please go to the video that is on our website at therapistsuncensored.com, and you will be able to check out this short little free video where we explain what the heck we're talking about. And then also there are obviously tons of podcasts that are free for you to check out. And please subscribe. And the most important thing you can do is review us, because that lets the world know that this is good, valuable content, and share it freely. Okay. Thank you so much, Becky Mendeville, for joining us.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Mendeville.
You want to give my Twitter handle too while you're at it?
Please.
No,
Would you like to?
No.
Okay. Everybody check out to see in the show notes whether or not Becky added her Twitter handle. And if she did, we're going to all applaud her. And if she didn't, we're going to totally respect that she is taking this at her own pace.
Thank you.
All right. We will see you right around the bend. Thank you for listening.
Therapist Uncensored is Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. This podcast is edited by Jack Anderson.